How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AETA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you.
The building changed after dark. By day, Silvaline Trade Group's Boston headquarters pulsed with motion. Elevators chimed, heels clicked across polished floors, and voices carried confidence that came from power, money, and urgency. By night, it became something else entirely. The lights dimmed to a muted glow, leaving long corridors half-submerged in shadow. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and fresh linoleum. Every sound traveled farther than it should have, echoing softly as if the building itself were listening. Marian Keller pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor with practiced care. She moved quietly, almost instinctively, as though silence were a rule she had learned long ago. One hand steadied the bucket. The other guided the cart's squeaking wheel away from the wall so it wouldn't draw attention. Her posture was straight despite the ache in her lower back, and her expression held the calm focus of someone who could not afford mistakes. At 30, Marianne had learned how to make herself invisible. She wore the standard janitorial uniform, plain, dark, practical. Nothing about it hinted that she had once been the top student in her economics program, that she had debated case studies with professors who predicted she would go far. That life had ended abruptly 8 years earlier, paused by a pregnancy, then quietly erased when the pause became permanent. Her degree remained unfinished. Her marriage had not survived the reality that followed. The cart rattled softly as she stopped near a service corridor. She glanced toward the storage room at the end of the hall. The door cracked open just enough to let a strip of light spill out. Inside, Lucy waited. Lucy Keller was 8 years old and small for her age, with light hair that refused to stay neatly tied. She sat on a folded crate, legs crossed, a paperback balanced on her knees. Numbers and symbols filled the margins of the page in neat, careful handwriting. Small calculations she had scribbled while reading. Lucy read the way other children breathed, effortlessly and without pause, drifting between stories and equations with equal ease. Marianne checked her watch, then the hallway again. The night security guard had already passed. There were still 2 offices left on her route. She allowed herself one quiet breath before continuing. Cleaning offices at night had its own rhythm. Trash first, then surfaces, then the floors, always in the same order. Marianne followed it faithfully, grounding herself in routine. It was easier not to think when her body knew what to do. Yet thoughts crept in anyway. She remembered the day she had packed her textbooks into a box, telling herself it was temporary. She remembered the way Daniel had stood in the doorway weeks later, impatient, already distant, as Lucy cried in her crib. He had said the words plainly without anger. This was not the life he wanted. He had wanted momentum, not responsibility. Ambition, not compromise. He had left. And the world had not paused to ask Marianne how she planned to manage alone. The job at Silvaline had come later, after months of scraping by. It paid enough to cover rent on a small apartment at the edge of the city and the after-school program Lucy attended when Marianne's shifts ran late. It paid just enough to keep them afloat, not enough to dream. Marianne reached the end of the corridor and turned into an executive wing reserved for the highest offices. Here, the carpet was thicker, the doors heavier, the silence deeper. Nameplates gleamed softly in the low light, reminders of people whose lives continued long after Marianne clocked out. She paused outside one door, adjusting her grip on the mop handle. Inside, she could hear the faint hum of electronics still awake, servers and systems that never slept. She swiped her access card, opened the door, and stepped inside. The office was vast and orderly, every object placed with intention. Marianne began her work without looking around too much. She had learned that curiosity was a liability. Behind her, down the hall, Lucy turned a page and wrote another line of numbers in the margin. lips moving silently as she calculated. She did not feel afraid sitting alone in the storage room. She trusted her mother's instructions, trusted the rules they lived by. Stay quiet, stay out of sight, wait. This was their life now. Exhaustion pressed on Marianne's shoulders, heavy but familiar. Still, she worked carefully, deliberately refusing to rush. Dignity, she had learned, did not require witnesses. It lived in the way she did her job, in the way she endured without complaint, in the way she kept going even when the world pretended she wasn't there. For now, the building slept, and within its shadows, Marianne Keller did what she always did. She held everything together quietly. Marianne saved the executive offices for last. They were always the quietest at night, sealed away from the rest of the building by thicker doors and an unspoken rule that nothing here was meant to be touched without permission. Gregory Crowell's office sat at the very end of the corridor, marked by a simple, brushed metal nameplate that reflected the dim overhead light. No title, no flourish, just his name. She swiped her access card and eased the door open, careful not to let it swing too wide. The room greeted her with a soft hum, the muted sound of electronics still alive, screens asleep but not off. The office was large, meticulously organized, almost austere. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the darkened city, Boston's skyline reduced to scattered points of light. Marianne moved with the same precision she brought to every room. Trash first. Coffee cup. A few discarded notes. She worked around the desk rather than behind it, keeping her eyes lowered. It wasn't fear so much as habit. People like Gregory Crowell occupied a different layer of the world. Crossing that invisible line had never ended well for her. She dipped the mop, wrung it out, and began working across the polished floor, slow and methodical. The ache in her back sharpened as she leaned forward, but she ignored it. The office smelled faintly of wood polish and expensive cologne, a reminder of a life structured around meetings and decisions that carried weight. She was halfway across the room when she heard it, a soft sound near the doorway. Not footsteps, a hesitation. Marianne straightened abruptly, heart stuttering. "Lucy," she whispered, the word sharper than she intended in the stillness. Her daughter stood just inside the office, frozen, as if she had stepped into a place she knew she wasn't supposed to be. Lucy wore her pink leggings and an old sweater with frayed cuffs, her hair slightly undone. Against the clean lines of the executive office, she looked impossibly small, like a misplaced detail. "I was just looking," Lucy said quietly. She wasn't frightened, just curious. Marianne set the mop aside and crossed the room in 2 quick steps. "You need to go back," she murmured. "You know the rule." Lucy nodded, but didn't move. Her gaze had already shifted, pulled toward the desk. Gregory Crowell's desk was massive, carved from dark wood, its surface almost entirely clear. Almost. A thick folder lay open near the center, papers neatly aligned, held down by a simple metal clip. The top page was filled with dense text and columns of numbers. Lucy took a step closer before Marianne could stop her. "Lucy," Marianne said again, more urgently now. But Lucy wasn't listening. She tilted her head, slightly reading. Her lips moved without sound as her eyes tracked across the page. The room seemed to contract around them, the silence growing heavier with each second. Marianne reached for her daughter's arm. The door opened. The sound was unmistakable, solid, deliberate. Marianne turned, her hand still hovering in the air, and felt the blood drain from her face. Gregory Crowell stood in the doorway. He was taller than she had expected, his dark suit immaculate despite the late hour, his tie loosened just enough to suggest fatigue rather than disorder. The overhead light caught the sharp lines of his face, his expression already hardening as he took in the scene before him. A janitor, a child, his office. "What is going on here?" he asked. The words were calm, but there was no warmth in them. Marianne's mind went blank. Apologies crowded her throat, urgent and desperate. but before she could speak, Lucy looked up. She turned toward Gregory Crowell, unflinching. Her eyes were serious, focused in a way that didn't match her age. She lifted one hand and pointed toward the open folder on the desk. "Did you do that on purpose?" Lucy asked. The question landed wrong in the room. Too soft and too direct at the same time. Gregory paused. His gaze followed the line of her finger to the document. "What?" he said, not sharply, but with genuine confusion. Lucy took another, small step closer to the desk. "Here," she said, pointing again. The profit split. Marianne felt the room tilt. "Lucy!" she whispered, barely able to breathe. Gregory didn't stop her. Lucy's eyes scanned the page once more. "It says 30% here and 70 there," she continued, her voice even. "But if that's right, you're giving up control. That doesn't make sense." Silence fell. Gregory Crowell moved slowly toward the desk, his attention no longer on Marianne or the child, but on the document itself. He leaned over the page, his brow tightening as he read the line Lucy had indicated. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then his expression changed. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness that settled into his posture. He straightened, then leaned in again, reading the clause once more, as if seeing it for the first time. The mistake was there, clear, costly, and impossible to ignore. Gregory lifted his head and looked at Lucy. "How old are you?" he asked. 8, she answered. He didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted briefly to Marianne, who stood rigid, waiting for consequences she could already feel forming. The city lights flickered beyond the windows. The document lay open between them, quiet and damning. No one spoke. The air in the office felt charged now, unsettled, as if something irreversible had just been set in motion, something none of them fully understood yet. Marianne did not sleep. She lay on the narrow couch in their apartment, staring at the ceiling as the minutes crawled past. Every time she closed her eyes, the image returned with painful clarity. Gregory Crowell standing in the doorway, the open folder on his desk. Lucy's small finger pointing at a line that should never have been questioned. She replayed the scene again and again, searching for a version that ended differently. By 3 a.m, she had already accepted what she believed was inevitable. Termination, immediate, quiet, a security escort, perhaps. The kind of dismissal that left no room for explanations. She wondered how she would tell Lucy. She wondered how long the savings would last. She wondered, briefly, whether finishing her degree years ago might have changed anything at all. At dawn, she rose and dressed carefully, choosing the most professional clothes she owned. A dark skirt purchased years earlier on clearance, a white blouse pressed until it held its shape. She tied her hair back neatly, hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. Lucy watched from the kitchen table, chewing her toast in silence. "Am I in trouble?" Lucy asked finally. Marianne knelt beside her. "No," she said, and hoped it was true. "You did nothing wrong." At 8:55 a.m., Marianne stood outside Gregory Crowell's office once more. The corridor was alive, now, footsteps, voices, the low hum of a building, fully awake. It felt like a different world from the one she had occupied the night before. At exactly 9, the door opened. "Come in," Gregory said. He sat behind his desk, composed, a slim folder open before him. In the daylight, his office looked sharper, less forgiving. Marianne took the chair opposite him, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Marianne Keller," he said, not as a question. 30. Incomplete economics degree. "Yes," she replied quietly. "Why didn't you finish?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She had expected reprimand, not curiosity. "Family circumstances," she said after a moment. "My daughter." Gregory nodded once. "And then you didn't return." "No," Marianne said. "I couldn't." He studied her for a moment, then closed the folder. Last night's document, he said, shifting seamlessly to business. The clause your daughter noticed. Marianne's chest tightened. I'm very sorry, she began. She shouldn't have. That clause was intentional, Gregory interrupted. Marianne stopped. It was a trap, he continued. A deliberately unfavorable profit, split, designed to test whether anyone would notice. No one did. Not my legal team. Not my deputy. Not the external consultants. He let the words settle. If it had been signed this morning, it would have cost this company a controlling interest in a critical venture. Marianne swallowed. Then why? Because someone wanted it that way, Gregory said, and because corruption rarely announces itself. He leaned back slightly. Your daughter saw what trained professionals ignored. More importantly, she spoke up. Marianne said nothing. She wasn't sure what could be said. Gregory's gaze returned to her, sharper now. I've reviewed your work history here. You're thorough, consistent. You don't rush. Even your cleaning logs are precise. She blinked, surprised. This company values attention to detail, he continued, and composure under pressure. He paused, then made a decision. I'm offering you a temporary position, he said. Junior documentation assistant. 3-month probation. You'll work under supervision, reviewing contracts, archiving records, verifying terms. Marianne felt lightheaded. Me? Yes. The salary will be triple what you earn now. Hours are 9 to 6. Fear rushed in first. Fear of failing, of being exposed, of losing everything all over again. But beneath it, fragile and unexpected, was hope. If you're willing, Gregory added. If not, we part ways professionally. No harm done. Marianne drew a slow breath. I'm willing, she said. Gregory nodded once, already reaching for his phone. Good. HR will brief you. And Marianne, she looked up. Your daughter was right, he said. It was a bad deal. And I don't tolerate bad deals. As Marianne left the office, the building seemed different again. Not kinder, not safer, but open in a way it hadn't been before. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain. Not because it was closing in, but because it was beginning. The transition happened without ceremony. One morning, Marianne Keller placed her cleaning cart back into the janitor's closet, hung her uniform on its hook, and closed the door. The metal latch clicked softly, final and ordinary, as if it were nothing more than the end of a shift. 10 minutes later, she stood at the edge of an open office floor, holding a temporary badge and a thin folder with her name typed neatly on the cover. The space felt exposed. Rows of desks stretched out beneath bright overhead lights. Screens already glowing with emails and spreadsheets. Conversations flowed easily here, confident, quick, layered with inside jokes and shorthand Marianne didn't yet understand. She became acutely aware of her posture, her hands, the sound of her shoes on the floor. There was nowhere to disappear to. No corners. No shadows. Marianne Keller. She turned to see Sandra Whitman approaching. Sandra Whitman was in her early 50s, impeccably dressed, her silver-streaked hair cut short and precise. Her gaze was sharp, evaluative, the kind that cataloged details instantly and forgot nothing. She did not smile. I'm the director of human resources, Sandra said. Follow me. They walked past desks that fell quiet just long enough for glances to be exchanged. Marianne felt them land on her back. Curious, skeptical, faintly amused. She recognized some of the faces. She had emptied their trash, wiped down their desks after hours. None of them looked away. Sandra stopped at a small workstation near a constantly humming printer. This is yours, she said. For now. For now, echoed in Marianne's head. I'll be clear, Sandra continued, lowering her voice slightly. This was not a popular decision. You were not expected. You were not prepared for. And people here will be waiting for you to fail. Marianne met her gaze. I understand. No, Sandra said evenly. You don't. Not yet. There is zero tolerance for mistakes. You will be watched. Your work will be scrutinized. Any misstep will be taken as proof that you don't belong. She paused. Do you belong? Marian swallowed. I plan to earn it. Sandra studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once. Good. Your first assignment is archival review. 2 years of contracts. Digitization, indexing. Verification. You will read them. Not skim. Read. She handed Marianne a thick stack of folders. If something seems unusual, you bring it to me. And only me. As Sandra walked away, the office noise returned. Quietly at first, then fully. Marianne sat down and opened the top folder. Her hands, steady despite the tension curling in her chest. By lunchtime, the whispers had found her. That's her. The janitor. Apparently. Unbelievable. A woman in a red dress stopped by Marianne's desk mid-afternoon. Alyssa Monroe, from marketing. Her smile sharp and deliberate. Hi, Alyssa said lightly. I'm Alyssa. Heard about your promotion. Marianne nodded. Nice to meet you. Alyssa's eyes flicked over her. Clothes? Posture. The careful way she held her pen. Must have been quite the cleaning job, she added, then laughed softly and walked away. Marianne didn't respond. She turned back to the document in front of her. The days settled into a punishing rhythm. Up before dawn to pack Lucy's lunch and walk her to school. A bus ride into the city. 8 hours of focused work under fluorescent lights. Evenings filled with homework, laundry, and exhaustion that seeped into her bones. When Lucy slept, Marianne read more contracts, her mind slowly reconnecting with concepts she hadn't used in years. The terms came back to her gradually. Payment schedules, penalties, risk allocation. She remembered how to look past the language to the intent beneath it. It was during one of those late evenings, eyes gritty from fatigue, that she noticed the first irregularity. It wasn't a glaring error, not like the clause Lucy had spotted. It was smaller, a pattern in vendor discounts that appeared generous on paper, but oddly consistent in their deviation from standard terms. She flagged the page, then another, and another. By the end of the week, she had a handful of notes and a quiet, persistent sense that something was off. Sandra passed by her desk and paused. How's it going? Slow, Marianne answered honestly, but thorough. Sandra nodded. Keep it that way. As Marianne returned to her screen, she felt the weight of the room press in again. The doubt, the resentment, the unspoken question of whether she deserved to be there. She did not answer it. She kept reading. The first real paycheck arrived quietly, deposited into Marianne Keller's account on a Friday morning. She stared at the number longer than she expected to. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't freedom. But it was more than she had earned in years, enough to breathe a little easier, enough to replace Lucy's worn-out shoes, to enroll her in the after-school robotics club she had been asking about for months, to stop calculating every grocery item twice. That evening, after Lucy had finished her homework, Marianne made a call she had been postponing. Daniel Keller answered on the third ring. What's wrong? He said immediately, already irritated. Money again? No, Marianne replied, keeping her voice steady. I wanted to talk about adjusting child support. There was a short laugh on the other end of the line. Adjusted how? I have a new job, she said. It's salaried. I'm working full-time now. Silence followed, brief but heavy. Then Daniel scoffed. Doing what? Cleaning a different building. I work in documentation, Marianne said, at Silvaline Trade Group. Daniel laughed again, louder this time. You? In an office. His tone sharpened. You don't even have a degree. I'm not calling to argue, Marianne said. I'm calling because things have changed. Things haven't changed, Daniel snapped. You're still you. Don't pretend otherwise. He hung up before she could respond. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived. It was thick, official, delivered by courier rather than mail. Marian opened it at her desk during lunch, her hands beginning to shake as soon as she recognized the formatting. A petition for custody modification. Daniel was seeking primary custody of Lucy. The reasons listed were precise and damning on paper. Long working hours, instability, alleged emotional unavailability. There were insinuations of inappropriate relationships at work, suggestions that Marianne's position had not been earned legitimately. The room seemed to tilt. She folded the document carefully and slipped it into her bag. She finished her workday on autopilot, smiling when required, answering emails without registering their content. By the time she reached home, the fear had settled deep in her chest, cold and immovable. Lucy returned from her father's apartment that Sunday evening, quieter than usual. She didn't chatter about movies or pizza. She placed her backpack by the door and stood awkwardly in the hallway, twisting the strap between her fingers. Did something happen? Marianne asked gently. Lucy shrugged. Not really. Marianne knelt in front of her. Lucy. Lucy hesitated, then said, Dad's friend asked me questions. What friend? Alyssa, Lucy replied. The lady from your work. The one with the red dress. Marianne's stomach tightened. What kind of questions? Lucy frowned, trying to remember. Where you work. What your boss is like. If you stay late. If you're nice to him. She paused. She wrote things down. Marianne felt the pieces slide into place. That night, she sat alone at the kitchen table long after Lucy had gone to bed. The custody papers spread out in front of her. Daniel's voice echoed in her head. Alyssa's smile replayed itself with new meaning. The timing was too precise. The pressure too focused. This wasn't coincidence. At work the next day, Marianne moved through the office with heightened awareness. Conversations hushed when she approached. Alyssa watched her openly now, no longer bothering to hide the satisfaction in her expression. Marianne kept her head down, hands busy refusing to react. But inside, the fear grew sharper. She was not afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of losing her child. The isolation crept in quietly. She stopped reaching out to friends she no longer had time to see. She slept less, ate less. Every sound of her phone made her flinch. Every unfamiliar number felt like a threat. By Friday, the sense of intimidation was undeniable. Someone wanted her distracted, unstable, afraid enough to step back. Marianne closed her eyes briefly at her desk, then opened them again. Fear was what they expected. She would not give it to them easily. The shift in Marianne's role was never announced. There was no email, no formal meeting, no change to her title on the internal directory. Gregory Crowell simply stopped by her desk one morning, paused long enough for the room to quiet itself, and said, Sandra will loop you in, before walking away. That was all. Sandra Whitman called Marianne into her office an hour later and closed the door behind them. She did not sit. Your responsibilities are expanding, Sandra said. Quietly. Officially, you're still documentation support. Unofficially, you're assisting with an internal audit. Marianne's pulse quickened. Of what? Procurement, Sandra replied. Past and present. She slid a thin folder across the desk. You'll review executed contracts, not just drafts, completed deals. Look for patterns, deviations, anything that doesn't align with our standard frameworks. I'm not a certified auditor, Marianne said carefully. Sandra met her gaze. You see what others overlook. That's why you're here, and because you haven't learned what to ignore yet. The work intensified immediately. Marianne began cross-referencing procurement contracts against internal benchmarks, pricing, advance payments, delivery penalties. At first, the discrepancies were almost imperceptible. A percentage point here, A slightly inflated service fee there. Nothing egregious on its own. But as she built comparison tables late into the night, something unsettling emerged. The same names appeared again and again. Different vendors, different services, but the approvals all traced back to Victor Samuels, Vice President of Procurement. Every contract with a regular pricing bore his signature. Every deviation, however small, passed through his office. Marian dug deeper. She searched public registries during her lunch breaks. Carefully, methodically, the vendor companies looked legitimate at first glance, registered properly, operational on paper. But their ownership structures raised quiet alarms. Relatives, married names, shared addresses, connections subtle enough to escape casual scrutiny. By Friday evening, Marian had assembled a working file, annotated contracts, ownership links, timelines. She saved everything to her secured project folder, backed up twice, and logged out with a sense of grim certainty. Something was very wrong. The following Monday, the folder was gone. Marian noticed it the moment she logged in. Her desktop was clean. Too clean. The directory where weeks of work had lived simply didn't exist. Her chest tightened. She checked the recycle bin, the shared drive, the audit archive. Nothing. Her hands trembled as she refreshed the screen, then froze as a voice rang out behind her. What is this supposed to mean? Victor Samuels stood several desks away, holding a printed email. His face was flushed with anger. Conversations around them stalled mid-sentence. Explain, he demanded, loud enough for half the floor to hear. Marian stood. I don't know what you're referring to. You accessed restricted procurement data, Samuels said sharply. Copied sensitive files, and now they're gone. He held up the paper. An anonymous report suggests you were preparing to sell them to a competitor. The room went silent. That's not true, Marian said. My files were deleted. I didn't copy anything. How convenient, Samuel snapped. You lose the evidence right when you're caught. Sandra stepped forward. Victor, this is inappropriate. Oh, is it? Samuel shot back. You brought her in. A janitor with no degree suddenly auditing procurement? And now our pricing data shows up with a rival firm. Gregory Crowell emerged from his office at the far end of the floor. What's going on? He asked calmly. Samuels turned to him. She's compromised us, he said. I want her terminated immediately. Gregory's gaze shifted to Marianne. Is that true? No, she said. Her voice held. Barely. My work was erased overnight. By who? Samuels demanded. Your imaginary accomplice? Before anyone could answer, a quiet voice cut through the tension. I can check. Ethan Brooks stood near the server alcove, his posture hesitant, but his expression focused. He wore his usual rumpled sweater, glasses slightly crooked. Do it, Gregory said. Ethan moved to Marianne's workstation and began typing. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. The office held its breath. Files weren't copied, Ethan said after a moment. No external transfer. No cloud sync. Samuels opened his mouth to speak. They were deleted, Ethan continued, manually, at 2:14 a.m. He paused, then turned the monitor slightly. The login wasn't from Marian Keller's credentials. Gregory stepped closer. Whose was it? Ethan looked up. Victor Samuels, Office 405. The color drained from Samuel's face. That's absurd, he barked. He's lying. Ethan kept going. There's also a call log. Outbound. Same time window. From your terminal to Alpha Group's procurement office. The silence that followed was absolute. Gregory straightened. Security. 2 guards appeared almost immediately. You're suspended, Gregory said to Samuels, his voice flat. Effective now. HR and legal will handle the rest. Samuels tried to protest, to shout, but the guards were already escorting him toward the elevators. As he passed Marianne, his eyes burned with something darker than anger. The office slowly exhaled. Ethan restored the deleted files within minutes. Marianne sank back into her chair, her body shaking now that the tension had broken. Vindication washed through her, sharp, overwhelming. But beneath it lingered something else. Fear, because she had been right, and because now the people she had exposed knew exactly who she was. Gregory Crowell did not wait for the lawyers to advise him. By the afternoon following Victor Samuels' removal, the atmosphere inside Silvaline Trade Group had shifted from shock to speculation. Legal teams moved quietly through conference rooms. Security protocols were tightened. Names were spoken in low voices, followed by abrupt silences when footsteps approached. Gregory watched it all from behind closed doors, then made a decision that had nothing to do with optics. He called Marianne into his office just before the end of the day. Lucy was already waiting downstairs with her backpack, homework unfinished, eyes wide with exhaustion. "You're not going home tonight," Gregory said once the door was shut. Marianne stiffened. "Am I?" "No," he said calmly. "You're not in trouble, but you're exposed. And so is your daughter." He slid a small key ring across the desk. 2 keys, a handwritten address. "My mother's house," he continued. "Pine Hollow. It's empty, quiet, no press, no connections to the company." Marian stared at the keys. I can't accept this." "You can," Gregory replied, "and you will, just for now." There was no warmth in his voice, but there was certainty, the kind that did not invite argument. Pine Hollow sat an hour outside the city, tucked into a fold of trees and narrow roads that seemed to muffle sound itself. The house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, modest but well kept, its white siding softened by ivy that had been left to grow undisturbed. The stillness was immediate. Lucy stepped out of the car and breathed in deeply. "It's really quiet," she said. "That's the point," Marianne replied. Inside, the house felt lived in despite its emptiness. Furniture remained where it had been left. Family photographs lined the hallway, holidays, birthdays, moments frozen in time. A woman with kind eyes appeared again and again, her smile gentle but reserved. "Your grandmother?" Lucy asked, pointing. "Yes," Gregory said from the doorway. "Eleanor Crowell." That night, for the first time in weeks, Marianne slept through until morning. The days that followed unfolded slowly, deliberately. Lucy attended a small local school temporarily. Marianne worked remotely, reviewing files sent by Sandra under strict security protocols. The chaos of the office felt distant here, like a storm contained beyond the trees. It was on the 3rd afternoon that Lucy discovered the attic. She called down from the staircase, excitement breaking through the calm. "Mom, there are books up here." Marianne climbed the narrow steps carefully. The attic was clean but untouched, sunlight filtering through a single window. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, labeled in careful handwriting. In the far corner sat a trunk. Inside were journals, leather-bound, worn at the edges, each dated meticulously. Eleanor Crowell's name appeared on the inside cover of every one. Marianne hesitated before opening the first. The entries were intimate, reflective. Eleanor wrote about loneliness, about raising her sons after her husband's death, about the weight of expectations placed on Gregory as the elder. Page after page revealed a woman who had loved fiercely but quietly, who had learned to endure without complaint. And then, midway through one journal, a name appeared. Anthony. Marianne slowed her reading. Eleanor wrote of a younger son, restless, impulsive, brilliant in a different way. She described arguments, distance, a decision that fractured the family. Anthony had left, or been pushed. The details were unclear, tangled in regret. "He didn't disappear," Lucy said softly, peering over Marianne's shoulder. She knew where he was. Marianne nodded. Eleanor had written about letters returned unopened, about rumors, about guilt that never faded, about silence that felt deliberate. That evening, Marianne told Gregory what they had found. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, he looked toward the window, the trees swaying gently beyond the glass. "I knew she kept journals," he said finally. "I never read them." "Anthony is alive," Marianne said. Gregory closed his eyes briefly. "I suspected as much." The revelation did not bring relief. It brought weight. That night, Marianne stood on the back porch, the cool air settling around her. The house creaked softly, alive in its quiet way. Lucy slept upstairs, safe for now. The danger hadn't passed. It had only shifted. But here, in the stillness of Pine Hollow, there was space to breathe, space to prepare, space before everything changed again. It felt like the pause before something inevitable, the calm before the final storm. The trade exhibition arrived with ruthless timing. For Silvaline Trade Group, it was the most visible industry event of the year. 3 days of negotiations, public commitments, and reputational risk compressed into a single, high-profile showcase. Investors, competitors, regulators, and journalists would be present. Deals would be announced. Futures would be implied. There would be no margin for error. For Gregory Crowell, it was the moment everything converged. Despite the ongoing internal investigation, Silverline could not withdraw without signaling weakness. The exhibition would go forward, quietly, deliberately, and under heightened security. Marianne knew this when Sandra called her early that morning. "You're coordinating logistics," Sandra said without preamble. "Vendor access, document flow, stage materials, internal briefings. Everything passes through you." Marianne paused. "That's a lot of exposure." "Yes," Sandra replied, "which is why it needs to be clean." By the time Marianne arrived at the convention center, the space was already alive with controlled chaos. Booths were being assembled, digital displays tested, security teams stationed at key entrances. The Silvaline area occupied the central floor, designed to project stability and confidence. Marianne moved through it all with a clipboard and an earpiece, checking names against access lists, verifying shipments, cross-referencing schedules. Every minute was accounted for, every document logged. Pressure pressed in from all sides. She felt it when a shipment arrived 10 minutes late, when a vendor insisted on bypassing protocol, when a junior staffer panicked over missing presentation materials that Marianne located in seconds. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She worked the way she always did, precise, methodical, unyielding. Somewhere across the floor, eyes watched her. Daniel Keller arrived shortly after noon on the first day. Badge clipped to his jacket, his smile practiced. He was not scheduled to be there. Marianne noticed immediately. Alyssa Monroe followed an hour later, dressed impeccably, moving easily through the space as if she belonged. She exchanged brief glances with Daniel, subtle enough to be missed by anyone not already alert. Marianne felt the warning settle in her chest. She signaled Ethan Brooks through the earpiece. "We may have an issue." "I see them," Ethan replied. He was stationed in the temporary surveillance room, monitors lining the walls. "I'm tracking movements." The attempt came quietly. A delivery request rerouted. A restricted document packet misplaced. A technician suddenly claiming authorization to access the stage systems. Each move was small, plausible, designed not to trigger alarms on its own. But together, they formed a pattern. "Someone's trying to disrupt the main presentation," Ethan said. "Possibly swap documents or crash the system." Marianne scanned the floor and spotted Alyssa near the document transfer station, speaking to a staffer whose badge color didn't match his role. Cut access to Station C, Marian said. Now. Security responded immediately, redirecting personnel under the guise of a routine check. The staffer was escorted away without incident. Alyssa's smile tightened, just briefly. Minutes later, a power fluctuation rippled across the stage lighting. Gasps followed. The main screen flickered, then stabilized. Contained, barely. Ethan's voice returned, sharper now. Daniel attempted to enter the control corridor. Security stopped him. He claimed confusion. Log everything, Marian said. The exhibition continued. On the surface, Silvaline's presence remained flawless. Presentations were delivered on schedule. Meetings proceeded. Applause came at the right moments. But beneath it all, tension coiled tightly, invisible but unrelenting. Gregory watched from the sidelines, his expression composed. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He understood exactly what was happening. By the end of the first day, the threat had been neutralized, though not eliminated. Daniel and Alyssa were still present, still watching, still waiting for something to break. Nothing did. As the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Marian finally allowed herself to exhale. Her hands shook slightly as she set her clipboard down. This had not been the reveal. It had been the warning. And as the exhibition moved toward its final day, toward Gregory Crowell's keynote address, the tension sharpened. Whatever truth was coming next would not remain hidden much longer. The stage was set. The final day of the exhibition began with a sense of anticipation that felt heavier than applause. By mid-morning, the main hall was filled beyond capacity. Industry leaders, press representatives, and senior partners took their seats, drawn not just by Silvaline Trade Group's prominence, but by the rumors quietly circulating since the first day. Something was coming. No one could say what, but everyone felt it. Backstage, Marianne stood with her headset in place, monitoring schedules and signals, her posture steady despite the tension thrumming beneath her skin. Ethan's voice came through her earpiece, low and focused. All systems stable. Security is in position. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Across the hall, Gregory Crowell waited near the stage entrance, reviewing notes he already knew by heart. His expression was controlled, but Marianne recognized the stillness in him now. This was not nerves. It was resolve. The keynote began precisely on time. Gregory stepped onto the stage to measured applause. He spoke first of the company's growth, its resilience, its commitment to transparency in a volatile market. His voice carried clearly through the hall, calm and authoritative. The words were familiar, expected until they weren't. There is, Gregory said, pausing, another matter I need to address today. The room quieted. For years, Silvaline operated under the assumption that loyalty and experience were safeguards. We believed internal oversight was sufficient. We were wrong. A ripple passed through the audience. Cameras lifted. Pens stilled. Gregory turned slightly, gesturing toward the side of the stage. I'd like to introduce someone. The man who stepped into the light was unfamiliar to most, but not to Gregory. Anthony Crowell walked forward without hesitation. He was slightly broader than his brother, his posture relaxed in a way Gregory's never was. Where Gregory's gaze was sharp and guarded, Anthony's eyes were open, searching, unmistakably alive. A murmur swept the hall. Anthony Crowell, Gregory said, his voice steady but altered. My brother. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to stop. Anthony took the microphone. He didn't smile. I wasn't sure I'd ever stand here, he said quietly. But some debts don't disappear with time. Screens behind them lit up. Documents appeared, financial records, transaction histories, timelines stretching back more than a decade. Names surfaced. Shell companies, procurement irregularities, patterns too precise to deny. Anthony spoke plainly, outlining a long-running scheme orchestrated by Victor Samuels. built on insider access and hidden ownership structures. He named accomplices. He described how contracts were siphoned, inflated, rerouted, how silence was bought and threats were leveraged. The room grew colder with every word. And when the risk became too high, Anthony continued, those involved began to eliminate liabilities. He did not need to explain further. Security moved as names were spoken. Daniel Keller rose abruptly from his seat, face pale. Alyssa Monroe stood beside him, her composure cracking as officers closed in. There was no shouting, no struggle, just the sharp, unmistakable sound of consequences arriving. Marianne watched from the edge of the hall, her breath shallow. Lucy's face flashed in her mind. The fear, the pressure, the weeks of doubt. It was over. Anthony finished speaking and stepped back. The silence that followed was not confusion, it was understanding. Gregory returned to the microphone, his eyes never leaving his brother. Silverline will cooperate fully with authorities, he said, and we will rebuild openly. Applause rose slowly, then firmly, not celebratory but resolute. When the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Gregory and Anthony stood alone on the stage. For a long moment, neither spoke. I looked for you, Gregory said finally. I know, Anthony replied. I wasn't ready to be found. Gregory nodded once. I should have listened. Anthony exhaled, something easing in his shoulders. We both survived. That counts for something. They embraced, briefly, awkwardly, honestly. Nearby, Marianne turned away, giving them privacy. Her role in this moment was finished. She had done her part. Truth had surfaced. Justice had followed. And for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something to endure, but something that could finally be built. Justice did not arrive with noise. It settled quietly, document by document, ruling by ruling, as truth moved from the public stage into the slow machinery of law. Daniel Keller's custody petition collapsed before it could gain traction. The evidence presented, his coordination with Alyssa Monroe, his role in attempted sabotage, the financial irregularities tied to Victor Samuel's network, undermined every claim he had made. The court dismissed his case without hesitation. Lucy remained with Marianne, where she had always belonged. The relief was profound, but it was not dramatic. There were no tears in the courtroom, no triumphant words. Marianne simply held Lucy's hand a little tighter as they left the building, both of them breathing more freely than they had in months. At Silverline, changes followed with equal quiet. Gregory Crowell called Marianne into his office one morning, this time without tension, without urgency. The room felt different now, lighter, stripped of secrets. We're establishing a permanent internal audit department, he told her. Independent, accountable, and answerable only to the board. Marianne listened, careful not to assume. I want you to lead it, Gregory continued, not as a favor, as recognition. She did not speak right away. The weight of the offer pressed against everything she had once believed about herself, about ceilings, limitations, the narrow spaces she had learned to survive within. You don't need to answer now, Gregory added, but know this, you've already been doing the work. She accepted before she left the room. The company arranged for her education to be formally reinstated. Tuition was covered. Scheduling was flexible. What had once been abandoned out of necessity returned as a choice. Marianne studied in the evenings, methodically, without drama, the same way she approached everything else. She finished what she had started. Pine Hollow stopped feeling temporary. The house, once a refuge, then a shelter, became a home. Lucy thrived there, her days filled with school, friends, and curiosity that was no longer shadowed by fear. The garden grew back slowly, tended with patience rather than urgency. The journals were returned to their place in the attic. No longer secrets, simply history. Ethan Brooks became part of their lives in the same unforced way. He never announced his presence. He showed up when things needed fixing. He stayed when conversations ran long. He listened more than he spoke. Lucy trusted him without hesitation, which Marianne understood as the highest measure of anything. Their relationship unfolded without promises or declarations. It was built instead on reliability, on shared meals, late-night problem-solving, quiet laughter. Nothing rushed, nothing hidden. 2 years passed. Marianne stood in her office one afternoon, reviewing a report that would be presented to the board the following week. The department she led was small, precise, and respected. Her work was not visible to the public. It was not meant to be. Lucy, now 10, waited at home with a book open on the kitchen table, pencil in hand, already searching for patterns. She talked about the future in calm, deliberate ways, about fairness, about rules that mattered. Strength, Marianne had learned, did not announce itself. It accumulated. It lived in consistency, in attention, in the refusal to look away. For those listening, her story offered no shortcuts and no spectacle. Only this: details matter. Integrity often works quietly, but it works. Dignity is not loud, it is steady. If this story stirred something familiar, consider the moments in your own life when quiet courage changed the direction of things. Share your thoughts. Reflect on fairness, resilience, and the strength that often goes unseen but never uncounted.